Hello, everyone. I'm Eileen Rochford, CEO of the marketing and strategy firm, The Harbinger Group. Welcome to our podcast, Can You Hear Me?
And I'm Rob Johnson, president of the consulting firm Rob Johnson Communications and former and longtime television news anchor and reporter. And it's because of this background that I'm intrigued and interested in diving into this topic.
Yes, Rob, you've certainly had a front row seat to the transformation of news reporting over this last decade and even longer, haven't you?
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Well, there's no question that the prevalence of misinformation and disinformation, along with the nearly complete shift to digital news consumption, it's forever changed what news looks like and means to each and every one of us. So today, we're going to ponder the question of what is the path forward for journalists and content creators. According to the World Economic Forum, independent creators and engaged communities represent the future of journalism. WEF suggests that the economic decline for media companies that was accelerated by COVID triggered journalists to become independent content creators, whereby reporters and writers could create super invested communities around local and niche interests.
That's right. There's a lot to unpack here with that first notion, but fortunately, I believe we have the right guest to help us do it. Beni Enas is a part-time writer and producer at ABC7. She's currently a journalism instructor at Geneva High School and was also a former journalism professor at Northern Illinois University and Columbia College. She definitely has her finger on the pulse of the young people, the next generation of journalists. And I'm proud to say that she and I were once television colleagues. Beni, it is so nice to have you.
Thank you so much, both of you, for having me on the show. I'm kind of honored to be doing this tonight.
Well, we're so excited that you could make it fit with your schedule and that you're here to share your perspective, Beni. I mean, Rob has his experience working with you. I have my experience working with you, but I think our listeners would really benefit from getting some context. Just maybe if you could fill us in about your career, kind of the things that you've done and where you've landed today, because I think that's a great lead in to all of the insights you'll be able to share.
Absolutely, Eileen. Thank you. And let me just start by saying the highlight of my career was working with Rob. So then we'll just work backwards from that point.
Well played. Nice.
That $20 really paid off for me, didn't it?
Yes. Just keep it coming. Keep it coming. Okay. So I have been in the broadcasting industry for about, 30 years now. I started as a high school student having an internship at CBS 2 in New York. So that's what really opened my eyes to wanting to go into broadcasting. So I got a degree in broadcasting from Buffalo State College in New York. And my first job out was at News 12 Long Island, which is a 24-hour cable news operation on Long Island. From there, I became a producer at News 12 Connecticut, and was reporting on Long Island. So I was actually working 7 days a week, going from one state to another state. Yeah, it was tough, but then I loved it. And like a lot of the students that I'm teaching now, that's what they do. They absolutely love it and want this as a career. So I can relate to that. From News 12 Connecticut, I went on to work at CNN in Atlanta, which was really a great experience for me. I was there during the time when Princess Diana died. President Clinton was impeached during all of these really huge news events. So that was a wonderful experience to be at CNN. From there, I moved up to Chicago and worked at ABC, WLS. That's where Rob and I met. Worked there for a couple of years. And from Chicago, moved west to LA. Worked at Channel One News, which is which was a station that went out to high schools and middle schools across the country. So people like Anderson Cooper, Maria Menounos, Lisa Lang, they all are Channel One alumni, Lauren Jiggett. So I can keep dropping names all day, but most of them are very much in the industry now. So I worked with young people there as well, because like I said, it was going out to high schools and middle schools across the country. And I think that's where my love of teaching kind of was born. Came back to Chicago and started teaching at Columbia. And then freelanced at NBC and CBS, then ultimately started producing Chicago Tonight, and did shows like the Golden Apple Awards, where Eileen, you and I met, and then went on to teach at Northern Illinois University, And from there, ended up where I am now, which is Geneva High School. So I teach there full time. And like you mentioned, I work part-time at ABC 7, writing and producing on the weekends. So I've kind of been all over, lived in a lot of states and got to meet a lot of wonderful people. But the bottom line is still have journalism in my blood and love everything about it.
So
Wow, that is
completely the right
career.
person. Oh yeah.
Just awesome. Well, I mean, I could just talk to you all day about, Princess Diana's death and Bill Clinton's impeachment, but we're not going to do that today. That's not what we're here for. No, but really cool. I love it. So, okay, we teed up this discussion with the notion that journalism is flourishing, with reporters being content creators and focusing on local or niche reporting. And since you bring that very unusual perspective, Beni, you kind of bridge both the professional journalism today environment and the emerging journalists of tomorrow world, right? What are you seeing with the young minds you come across on a daily basis?
So at the high school level, a lot of the students are taking journalism classes because they are curious about it, right? And what we pitch is media production classes. So whether they're doing it to be in the news business or if they're doing it to produce films one day, whatever that is, the bottom line is they're going to need to know how video and audio and interview skills, all of those things, writing skills, all of those fundamental skills are some way going to help them regardless of what career they end up pursuing, right? So I just think that high school students especially have a real keen understanding of the fact that they need to understand video and they need to understand audio and they need to understand technology. Right. So a lot of them are taking those classes now because of that. As far as being journalists and actually going into news itself, I haven't come across too many students who want to pursue that as a field. And I think if I had to guess, it would be because most of them aren't still, perhaps the way we were when we were younger, they're not watching traditional newscasts. They're not reading newspapers. They really aren't. They know what's happening around the world, but most of it is from TikTok. And that is the reality. So even though they may be informed by perhaps listening to the news because they happen to be passing the living room on the way to their kitchen and their parents have the news on in the background, and then they get to hear something, most of what they know are through the social media avenues that they have on their phones. And that's really how they are getting their news. So I don't think many of them are thinking that they want to be anchors behind a desk one day because they don't even have as much exposure to that world as perhaps we did when we were growing up.
Well, the other thing too, Beni, that's interesting to me is you're talking about media production, and we think about that prism, say 20 years ago, and it was some big clunky camera and all this equipment you had to have. And because of technology and because of TikTok and all the things that you're talking about here, we're really talking about, and now you see the iPhone 13 commercials. It's like, hey, you can produce a movie on this little thing. I would think that the way that you're going about it in the classroom with these students when it comes to these production techniques has changed dramatically from the time we were coming up and we were younger in this business.
Absolutely, 100%. As a matter of fact, all of my beginning film production students shoot packages on their phones. My thing is storytelling is storytelling. Yes, will it look better if you're using a broadcast camera? Absolutely, but nowadays that's even debatable. But the reality of it is what I think another point to make is the fact that being on TV is no longer this mystical, amazing thing. Everyone right now can get on air, right? Yep. So that too has changed a lot. But as far as, yes, producing stories nowadays, everyone can be a citizen journalist. And yes, just from using their phone, they're able to do interviews on the spot. They're able to get video on the spot. They're able to do all the things that before we used to kind of reserve for that special group of trained professionals. That really has changed a lot. So yes, we and even with editing, right? There's so many apps to edit There's desktop editing options now. So people are able to put together movies and even news packages, those stories that go on the air that once used to be a very, specialized thing that you need to be trained to do and get a degree to be able to do. A lot of people can just put that together now very easily by just using an app on their phone.
Isn't that the truth?
And I love it because of the accessibility, that represents. But it also presents some perhaps concerning issues just because of the way that information can get represented or misrepresented. Do you cover that at all in your classes with these kids?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, our thing is, you still have to be factual, right? You still have to be accountable for the information that you're putting out there. And at the end of the day, if you're part of something, and in our case, our daily announcement show, we still have a reputation. We still have to be credible. So it's not enough to not fact check and just give an opinion. So that's where it goes back to the fundamentals. Like I said, being able to teach students how to still write, right, and how to still fact check, and how to present a story that's balanced and you get both sides of the story, and all of those skills, they still need to be taught how to do that. And I think that they need to understand the importance of that too, right? So we can hand them a camera. That doesn't mean that they know how to get a close-up, a medium, a wide shot to be able to edit in a certain way where there aren't jump cuts. So those fundamental skills still need to be taught to students who plan on doing this for a profession, not just a hobby. So yes, absolutely. I think every journalism teacher out there will always still feel the need to teach students the ethical ways of covering stories, so that we can still be responsible and not continuously having to defend ourselves against the fake news allegations, because that's really what we're up against, is that everyone thinks that the credibility is what we're trying really hard to sustain.
Because Beni, and people sometimes, when I say, getting two sources, getting both sides of the story, this stuff matters, and everybody kind of shakes their head because of the prevalence of fake news, or if I disagree with you, it's fake news. Do you find that young people are as beholden to the truth as maybe we once were? And I'm not saying, oh gosh, we had it all right, but we didn't have all these competing interests when we were growing up in the journalism world. And now with all of the different social media and everything else and all the ways that you can get information, whether it's true or not, do you find that young people say the truth does matter, or they say, nobody else cares, I don't either?
Unfortunately, I think sourcing the information, it's hard to tell nowadays what is true and what is not, right? So what they have access to online by Googling something, they're not, I would say most of my students anyway, aren't used to necessarily having research behind the information that they're putting out there. So to them, it's just wherever they get the information first, right? So if they do a Google search, the first two articles that are up there, they'll quickly read the first paragraph, and then they're done. And
it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter where it came from, which is kind of frightening.
Right. That part is kind of frightening. So encouraging them to read an entire article, to take the time and to really read it, and read it with a skeptical point of view, and then take that and go so far as to say, well, ask another question that takes you to another question. That really tends not to happen. So they take what they see as that piece of information, and that becomes very factual. And so
they're accepting what they see. So are you saying that they accept what they see on Google, as in what gets served up to them, as fact without really looking into it? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I mean, I would say that's been my experience. I don't want to say that's the experience all across the board and everyone does that. No, I absolutely would not.
But we
say
only
that.
asked you to be our guest, though.
Right.
So
Right.
You guys have
credibility here.
That is factual. What you're seeing is factual.
Right. So for what it's worth, I do find myself having to tell them to take the time to really go through and read more. Right.
Because really
again,
you're talking about what you're talking about is not only the first two articles that pop up on Google, but also knowing, like, if I see a trusted source, and through all of my years, I know what a trusted source is. And I know that both of you do as well. And if you see something else that's something I've never heard of before and you click on it and it looks unprofessional or sketchy, then you have to be like, gosh, is any of this true? Or, how is this information being disseminated by these people?
right. And I think that more times than not, it's a time issue. They don't really feel like taking the time and making the commitment to getting to the source of it more times than not. And in a classroom setting where I'm forcing people to go deeper and read more and really understand both sides of it, and can you write the story in a balanced way, then yes, but other than that, I think it's faster, shorter, more fun. That's what it tends to kind of boil down to. If it's just given to you in a fun way, then you're more likely to hear it, listen to it, digest it. If it's given to you in a long article, I would say that 90% of the people aren't reading through the entire article.
It's fascinating and terrifying.
Yes.
It is. Yeah.
Well, let's pivot here a little bit and talk about the commercial corporate journalism, places that we've worked at for years, Beni, continue to have viable business models. We're not saying that they do, but profit margins have shrunk. The revenue pie continues to shrink, and tough decisions have to be made about how to do this job, primarily because there are so many different outlets people can go to now, including social media, and they can say, this is where I get my news. And as we just talked about a second ago, it may not be the most reliable source, but people don't really seem to care that much about it. What I'm really interested in, though, is I'm seeing that certainly here in Chicago, we're now seeing a not-for-profit component to journalism. I'm talking about Block Club Chicago, which does hyperlocal neighborhood reporting we were just talking about. And the Chicago Sun-Times, which was just bought out by Chicago Public Media, making it one of the largest not-for-profit news organizations in the country. Now, I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but it seems like when you're talking about the current journalism model and trying to fight for those audiences and trying to fight for those ad dollars or various, and now that everybody's a digital, we're a digital organization. We're not a TV station. We're digital. That's what everybody says, even though not everybody understands it. So now we're talking about clicks as well, not just eyeballs, but clicks. Do you think this is the wave of the future, though, this idea of not-for-profit journalism, especially seeing a couple places in Chicago, kind of head in that direction, and to find out that this may be what the future looks like? This may be where the young people that you are teaching right now are going to spend their time as the content creators, as we were mentioning earlier, as the people who are in those communities and doing that important reporting? Or do you think this is just a blip on the radar?
I personally think that just gives more avenues of opportunities for these students. There are jobs to be had, right? And so if the students are trained to have them, they're going to be able to work in any of those stations and still create the kind of content that the stations are looking for. So that I feel like, if anything, that just gives more opportunities at market levels like Chicago for students and younger people to get their feet wet into just delivering news, however it is. At the end of the day, though, I still think that we're going to still have the ABCs, the NBCs, and the CBSs of the world competing for what seems to be the big news, right? The traditional news. I don't think that's going to go away. I do, however, think that it's on demand all the streaming, right? That's, to me, the wave of the future, is that you're not waiting till 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock around the dinner table anymore. You're watching your news when you want to watch it, where you want to watch it. And it just continues to just stream everywhere.
On your
right?
phone or your iPad. So it's like, I want to find out what's happening right now. And again, you don't have to wait for them to shout from the mountaintop at 5, 6, and 10. Here's what happened today, which is the way the relationship used to be. And now it's much different with the viewers and the consumers. Right.
And the talking heads, right? The interviews that are just easier to produce than the actual stories that we're so used to doing. It's a lot easier to book two people as guests behind a desk and have a conversation than it is to actually go out and speak to people and write a story and get visuals to go together with it and create these minute 30 packages when you can fill the air with 4-minute interviews and just have people debating issues. That's just a lot more cost effective. So I think that is going to be, we're definitely never getting away from that model.
Really interesting.
Which, as a matter of fact, that is another reason why I'm training my students to do more interviews than they are even to do pieces. We actually built an interview set at our school so that they can get more comfortable with that venue, because ultimately I think that they're going to do a lot more of those live interviews than they are in the field where you come back and then you're editing sound bites.
Yeah. And the other thing too, is that you're talking about, I think interviewing is a real skill, and to get illicit information out of other people, to have, a give and take where people are telling you things that you want to hear, that you want to ask them about, but also I think it keeps your mind sharp. So I think it's great that you're teaching them better interview skills, because I think that's a really important skill to have. But at the same time, the whole idea of storytelling and telling a good story and getting out in the community where all this is happening, maybe if there's less of an emphasis on that's a little bit problematic too, don't you think? Because I think we all agree at our core that telling a good story about something or somebody interesting is always very gratifying.
It's also memorable. Right. When you think about the last thing you watch, for news, you're going to remember, the amazing man down the street who built bicycles for all the teenagers in the neighborhood before you can remember the last debate you ever had watching on the air. Those stories are the ones that really stay with you.
Yeah.
Oh, no doubt. I'm so intrigued that you're teaching how to interview and that you've built this set. Can you tell us more about the skills that you're cultivating when it comes to interviewing, and kind of how you're doing that? It's intriguing to me.
Yeah, so at Geneva, we have a daily announcement show, and it used to be that we would just tell the student body exactly what was happening on the air every day. What was happening around school every day, and we would say that on the air. But I've turned it into a 6-minute daily kind of mini newscast, where the students in my other classes now all are responsible for turning packages or these little mini stories about exciting things that students are doing. And we have one tomorrow about an elite cheerleader, a girl with special needs who is now competing on the national level. And we did a profile piece on her. And so we incorporate those pieces into the daily newscast. And so it ends up being a 6-minute, like I said, a miniature show. But with that, we also do those interview sets interviews that we end up putting into the show as well. So students get to learn a little bit about storytelling and how to pitch a story, what makes for a good story, what are the good visuals, so on and so forth. They also learn how to write to the video they have. They learn how to interview, how to pick sound bites, all the things that reporters do out there, quote, in the real world. And then the interviews, we don't do any editing to, so it's kind of live to tape as well. And then once all of that is put there, it's very visual and it's fast moving and so on and so forth. So the school gets more or less a little newscast, a mini newscast every single day that airs inside in their classrooms, and the teachers have to play it for them. So it's a very captive audience. But
I love it.
Very, very clever to turn it into your own little newscast, though. That gets their attention.
Nice. Now, if we were to ask your students, Beni, what makes a good story? What have you been told to look for in a good
Mhm.
story? What would they say?
Okay, for them, it would probably be something that really tugs at your heartstrings and it's always attached to a person, right? So people are stories. And so I think that I've really instilled in them that you can talk about an issue, for example, what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, but we tied it to a high school student who is going to join the military after high school, right? So the story is it is about, there's a timeliness to it, right? It's about the war that's happening right now, but then you can connect when you meet your fellow classmate who now is joining the Navy and what that looks like through his eyes. So I always just tell them stories are about people. And if you can find a person who is a good character, then you can build on any subject after that.
That's so true. And I mean, it's at the core of what you still do and what I used to do. And actually what I still do in terms of, working with clients and that sort of thing, which is tell a good story. It doesn't matter if it's journalism or anything else. If you tell a story about somebody who's interesting and that's going to have impact, people are going to, they're going to remember that, as you mentioned earlier, Beni, because the interviews, yes, and opinion and all that sort of thing, and easy to produce. I understand all of that, but the thing that you're going to remember is, do you see the story about that person or this person and some of the things they were dealing with? Because those are always the most powerful, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And I actually tell my students, yes, it's great to want to be broadcasters. It's good to want to be a journalist, but first and foremost, be a storyteller. And that is exactly what I tell them that all the time. Just be a storyteller.
Amen.
Great advice. I mean, no matter what, profession they go into, that's a really useful skill in so many ways. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to guess that because you mentioned earlier, one of the main sources of information for these people may even just be TikTok on any given day, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to guess that you've seen some pretty interesting techniques being used in the packages they're creating. Can you think of any examples where you're like, oh, that's inspired by, said TikTok story or something else that was a cool trend? I just would love to hear a little bit about what you're seeing pop up in the packages they're creating that might be inspired by their day-to-day exposure.
I think I probably scare them not to put any of those things on there.
Fair enough.
She's still working there, so that so far it's worked.
Right. Exactly.
I did say inspired by.
I think that is the hardest time that my students have, and I tell them this, is pitching a story. It's figuring out what makes for a story because they've never done anything like this before. And so what they're exposed to, and you think about it, right? What is TikTok? It's a person that stands in front of the camera, says something for a quick 15 seconds, and then you're done, right? And that's it. So initially, when I get my students first in there, when you tell them they're going to be producing pieces, that's what they think those pieces are. It's just put a camera up there, say something, and be done with it. And so to have them have a completely different mindset that, oh no, it takes 8 hours to produce something that's a minute 20 on the air, that you actually have to go out and ask more than one question. And you have to ask a slew of questions, some that you may use, some you may use for information. I've seen students literally go out, tell someone to say something that they needed them to say, and then walk away. That's not an interview.
And that's really easy to edit, though, isn't it?
Right, exactly.
I think that's called fake news. I don't know.
Right, and I have to explain to them that no, you can't write the script for them. Right, you have to let the story unfold, and sometimes you may even be surprised that you go in and you imagine you're going to tell a story one way, and then you find out something else interesting, and that's the better story. I mean, we have those kind of conversations, but I think what TikTok has done is really make everything look fast and simple. And so that's really shocking to everyone when they go out there and realize that this takes time and effort and energy. And so So yes, that's been the shock factor. Have they actually, I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but have they folded in some of those techniques they've learned? Probably not, because like I said, I don't think they'd be getting a very good grade.
Very good.
But they had 1 million views on TikTok. No.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Still doesn't get you an A though.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
But you did answer my question, and in a surprising way, which I love, because it's evident that they have been influenced, obviously growing up with that impression, just certainly, in these very formative years in their lives, to think that 15-second thing they saw was super duper easy and somebody got on the first cut and they were done. And now in this course, they're realizing in so many ways that that's just not life. It might look like it, but it's not really. So there's this big difference between reality and social media, which that's a lesson in and of itself.
And to be honest, the other component of it is social media really isn't that visual, right? So trying to explain that TV especially is a visual medium, and that you have to also put things on the air for the eyes, right? So graphics and video over what you're talking about and writing to the video. So it's not enough to just come out and say there was a house fire, but you actually want video of the house fire as the person's talking about it. When TikTok really isn't that visual. And I don't know how many people thought about that, right? It's really just
TikTok's really looking, it's like, hey, look,
very
the camera's on me. It's on,
Yes. And so that's, again, is something I have to explain to the students, is that when we are making television, the more traditional way of making television, you do need to not just talk about something, but you need to show what you're talking about. So it's a see and say medium. And that's something that surprisingly I took for granted as being obvious, and it's not.
No, it's not.
Yeah. And saying it just doesn't make it so. And particularly in that world. Yeah. I was thinking about, Rob, we were talking about this a little bit, that, the on the ground coverage in places like war zones, right?
Yeah.
All of that coverage that we're seeing from Ukraine right now, and how that's, they say, the first global war played out on, global social media, right? And you think that's a skill in and of itself to teach future journalists. It's not enough just to get stories of people who might be here, who may be influenced because perhaps they have family back in Ukraine. That's a dimension of it. But if we didn't have coverage happening there on the ground, there's no way we would really know what's going on.
No, it's very important too, because Eileen and I were talking last episode about Ukraine and that sort of thing, and this war, and talking about the people that are there, that are on the ground, that are doing this reporting, that are putting their lives on the line. I thought those are really trusted sources of information. But in this world of social media and questionable news, there's no telling where some of this stuff is coming from. So my point was that the people that are there, that you see reporting there, those are the ones you should be trusting, regardless of what your political leanings may be.
Absolutely. And go back to the days of when CNN first showed images of the Gulf War. Changed the war significantly. It became very real for many people, right? And now, again, years later, we can see images pretty much everywhere, anytime, using all sorts of different mediums. But one thing, we just know that this doesn't allow people to stay in the dark. You'd have to really make an effort to be there at this point.
Yeah.
Are you talking about that in your classroom, Beni? The actual war in Ukraine and the coverage that's coming out of it?
Yeah, unfortunately, like I said, in that class that we do earlier in the day, it's too quick to talk about anything else because we're busy producing the daily shows. But yes, in the other beginning classes, we do have conversations regarding the coverage of any big news story, right? Outside, we have a segment called News Outside the Halls, which is just news that's happening outside of the school that students should be aware of. And I think that, it's important in schools and in classroom settings, and it's not just me, it's the world language teachers. They held a fundraiser and they raised money to send to Ukraine. I think the stories that really resonate with the students are when they realize that they have students their age who are now taking up arms and fighting in a war. That really resonates with high schoolers to realize this is what's happening here and now.
That's real courage.
Yeah. And we have a friend of mine who said they had a student here who was visiting from Ukraine, part of an exchange program, and then ended up going back there, and now still keeps in touch with the students that he met while he was here. And it really just drives home the point that they have counterparts in another part of the world that's experiencing the world very differently than they are.
Agreed.
Well, Beni, is there anything you want to share with our listeners about your perspective on kind of the future of journalism, or just communicators, those who are coming through your classroom right now? I'd love to hear that as our closing thought for this episode.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I told Rob this. I went to a convention for Student Television Network, STN, back in Long Beach in early March, I believe it was. And there were thousands of students there who are pursuing a career or going to college for journalism. They were high school students. It's a really great organization, and it encourages students from around the country to bring their equipment. They put together like an 8-hour newscast, they compete, they get awards, but they're on fire for the idea of news and journalism and the future of it. And it was really, really encouraged for all the people who say that this is just, it's dying and we're not going to have it. I looked at it and I felt very, very encouraged about how excited all of these high school students were to maybe, carry this on into the next generation. So yes, do I tell them even at the college level that yes, you'll be working overnights and, you'll be working weekends and holidays and get paid nothing when you first get out in there. Even
That's all true. Check. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. It's still a very viable career path. And what I say to them is now more than ever, though, even if you don't want to be in front of the camera, there's so many jobs out behind the scenes as well, whether you're doing lighting or graphics or audio or technical directing. But either way, it's still production and it's still media and it's still technology, and that's not going anywhere. So I feel like it's not just looking through the eyes of both college and high school students, and like I said, with this whole STN experience as well, it's really not dying. If anything, I feel like it's growing, and I feel like students more than anything else are seeing this as a real opportunity, as a fun place to work and a really important career to have, because I think if nothing else, the past couple of years have really shown us how important journalism is and how it really matters.
That's such a great point that you're making too, because you're talking about this, when I was pitching you this story about the future of journalism, and sometimes the subtext is, oh, it's dying. And you're like, and the answer that you're giving is no, it's evolving. And you had just come back from that conference in Long Beach and you're like, oh, what I saw, you were all fired up. You were on fire too, because
Absolutely.
you had seen and experienced that, and the perspective that you're giving us today about it. And as we talk about the ways that it's changing from the way it used to be, doesn't necessarily mean that this career path is coming to an end. It just means it's evolving and it's different than it used to be. And maybe the future of it is, yes, there'll still be a place for the big media, but it seems like the real growth area is going to be in some of these, hyper local and community endeavors where you can really get in there and explain things and report, news that really matters to the people who are in those communities.
100%. In either way, though, regardless, it's still all about checks and balances. It's still about having a fourth estate and someone to to ask the questions that really matter and to hold people accountable, right? And so I think that, like I said, the past couple of years, if nothing else, has shown that a lot of people, whether you like it or not, every time you say, well, I heard this and I heard that, I mean, you heard it somewhere in the media, right? And unless you yourself went down and filed a FOIA request yourself, unless you did that, then chances are you heard it from someone in the media. And that's really important to realize that what would life be like if you didn't have that option.
You filed the FOIA request and you got your answer in 8 months. That's
yeah, exactly.
Oh, Beni, it is so great to hear your voice and to have you on and to get to catch up with you and to hear what you had to say. I just can't thank you enough. I know, Eileen, you feel the same way about this. You were just terrific and really shining the light on some important issues related to journalism.
Thank you so very, very much for this opportunity. You have no idea how very honored I was to even get the call from you. And anytime, I love this. This was so much fun. My first podcast. It was great.
Oh, good. And thank you for carrying the torch forward. We need future journalists.
Yes, indeed. You got your, high school, college, still in the game, in a big newsroom in Chicago. You're checking all the boxes in terms of, the relevant experience that you have had, the relevant experience you have right now, and passing on those important values to the future journalists in America. So thanks for everything, Beni.
Thank you very much. Doing my part to pay it forward.
There you go.
Absolutely appreciate it.
That's beautiful. And that's going to do it for another edition of Can You Hear Me? Special thanks to our guest again, TV producer, writer, and journalism teacher, Beni Enas. I'm Rob Johnson, president of Rob Johnson Communications.
And I'm Eileen Rochford, CEO of the Harbinger Group. We thank you for listening today. And remember, you can listen to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts, on Apple, Google, Podcast, Spotify, and more.